Bienvenidas to Latina Literati. If you enjoy wonderful books, places, ideas, and people, then this is the channel for you. Today we're in Rincón, Puerto Rico, and it is a beautiful beach town municipality. But as always, we like to go back to the beginning, at least the beginning of this town, not of the island of Puerto Rico. So the island of Puerto Rico, of course, is inhabited by indigenous people. 1492, Columbus arrives. It claims it for Spain, and quickly a system of slavery is enforced on the inhabitants. Enslaved people are brought over from Africa, and towns, municipalities are established throughout the island. And so this is the westernmost town on the island, Rincón. And it was actually named after Don Gonzalo Rincón, who was a butler for a landowner. And when the landowner passed away, lo and behold, he left him lands and he left him gold. And it was named after this gentleman because he offered people who were suffering from poverty and famine, he offered them land to settle there. And so in his honor, the town was named Rincón. It was actually named Santa Rosa de Rincón. In the main plaza, the church is called Santa Rosa de Lima. So it's a small town. I want to say there's about 17,000 inhabitants. Most of the inhabitants are from outside of Puerto Rico, mostly from the United States, and the families that are from Puerto Rico are having real issues in terms of finding housing and the prices going up. Until we visited the town of Rincón, I just assumed that it had been named because Rincón in Spanish means corner. And so it is literally the westernmost corner of Puerto Rico where the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea meet. It also means that, but it's actually named after a person. You can see here the map where the two oceans meet, and it's just a little corner there in the west, but it is kind of the place to be if you want to surf in Puerto Rico. Since 1968, the first World Surfing Championship was actually held in Rincón. And since then, there are books, and there's even a statue in the middle of the town of a surfer. So it's a real surfing haven. You see the surfers coming in and out of the beaches. But what has really taken over were two supposed surfers who supposedly convinced both the fishermen and developers not to work near the beaches. And so they were able to lobby and get the Tres Palmas Natural Reserve set up. With that, they also became the largest developers in Rincón. So thousands and thousands of luxury units have gone into Rincón, and most of the people who live there part of the year from the United States. In 1960, North Americans came and built a nuclear reactor right on the beach. And then abandoned it in 1960. So there's a sealed reactor just sitting there next to a picturesque beach. It's quite strange, but there you have it. There's a wonderful, wonderful bookstore called Coquí on the main strip in Rincón, so if you go, highly recommend it. The best breakfast we had was at a place called La Cafeteria. Here you can see some of the dishes that we ordered. Really good and vegan friendly, veg friendly, and also very sustainable. It was the most sustainable spot that we found where everything was compostable that was used, so that was great. We went to a couple of really great restaurants. One of them was called Copa Llena, and it's the place to go for a perfect sunset meal. Another one is the Gastropub, right on the main drag. Really elevated cuisine. Rincón is a town that is filled with restaurants and with bars and with lovely shops. We met women who moved there from New Orleans and from San Diego, and there really were people who have moved to Rincón from all over the United States and have started new lives there. But in the midst of all of this very Sausalito-like vibe, beach town vibe, the reality is that about 40% of the residents, the Puerto Rican residents, live below the poverty level. So in the midst of all this luxury, you see the people suffering. And what are the ways that gentrification affects all communities? There is a housing shortage, and wages don't keep up with prices, and families can't afford to live in the area where their families have lived for a long time. So you see that in Rincón, but you also see a lot of economic activity. So again, Rincón is kind of the place where people go not just to enjoy the beaches, but also to have a very tranquil time in Puerto Rico, because it's a lot less crowded than, let's say, some of the other places. And there's a lot of comfort and good food and activities. On Thursdays, they have live music in the plaza, so you can go and see the artisans that have come in from outside of town to offer their wares. And so that's definitely worthwhile as well. So Rincón, thank you for a wonderful week. We've enjoyed it, had a great time. Now on to my favorite part of the video, my book recommendations. The first book is House on the Lagoon by Rosario Ferrer. And if you haven't read this is a good one. I mean, this is a novela, a page turner. I won't give away a lot of the secrets, but several women and what happens on the house in the lagoon. The second book I'm going to recommend is Witchcraft and Welfare by Raquel Romberg. And so we haven't just touched on this yet, but Puerto Rico, like all of the Caribbean nations where you had enslaved people, have a really strong sense of magic and of traditional ways of resolving problems. There are lots of stories and there's lots of lore as to how you solve problems using magic and that type of perspective. I'm not going to go into it here, but this book I think is a good overview, and so if you're interested in that, then I would recommend it. And the third book is Silent Dancing, a remembrance of a Puerto Rican childhood by Judith Ortiz Coffer, and it's exactly as the title implies. It is a looking back at her own childhood in Puerto Rico and what it was like growing up on the island when she did that. And so I always think that it's of interest to look back and see how different people have different perspectives on Puerto Rico, and having grown up there, what it was like from their perspective. My mother was raised in Puerto Rico, and my uncles, I love to hear their stories and to hear how they would collect fruit. Really interesting, because the traditional diet is actually plant-based, with maybe meat once a month. So fascinating to see, for example, that my great-grandmother used a method called a medias. So she would give someone seeds and then they would share the harvest. It's a way of communities sharing the benefits of work and resources. And so I feel like Puerto Rico needs that. It needs un sistema de medias. It needs people to invest in it and to find ways to resolve the problems for it. So the trip to Puerto Rico was wonderful, and I'm going to keep making videos about it. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. So I highly recommend, if you haven't visited Puerto Rico, you should. And thank you to everyone who made the trip so very special on the island. As always, we wish you mucho salud, mucho cariño y mucho amor. Muchas gracias.